Chapter 3 of William the Conqueror. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lars Rolander. William the Conqueror by Jacob Abbott. Chapter 3 The Accession. After spending a little time at Paris, Robert took leave of the king and of William his son, and went forth with a train of attendant knights on his pilgrimage. He had a great variety of adventures which cannot be related here, as it is the history of the son, and not of the father, which is the subject of this narrative. Though he travelled strictly as a pilgrim, it was still with great pomp and parade. After visiting Rome, and accomplishing various services and duties connected with his pilgrimage there, he laid aside his pilgrim's garb, and assuming his proper rank as a great Norman chieftain, he went to Constantinople, where he made a great display of his wealth and his magnificence. At the time of the grand procession, for example, by which he entered the city of Constantinople, he rode a mule, which, besides being gorgeously caparisoned, had shows of gold instead of iron, and these shows were purposely attached so slightly to the hoofs, that they were shaken off as the animal walked along, to be picked up by the populace. This was to impress them with grand ideas of the rider's wealth and splendour. After leaving Constantinople, Robert resumed his pilgrim's garb, and went on toward the Holy Land. The journey, however, did not pass without the usual vicissitudes of so long an absence and so distant a pilgrimage. At one time Robert was sick, and after lingering for some time in a fever, he so far recovered his strength as to be borne on a litter by the strength of other men, though he could not advance himself either on horseback or on foot. And as for travelling carriages, there had been no such invention in those days. They made arrangements, therefore, for carrying the duke on a litter. There were 16 Moorish slaves employed to serve as his bearers. This company was divided into sets, 4 in each, the several sets taking the burden in rotation. Robert and his attendant knights looked down with great contempt on these black pagan slaves. One day the cavalcade was met by a Norman who was returning home to Normandy after having accomplished his pilgrimage. He asked Duke Robert if he had any message to send to his friends at home. "Yes," said he, "tell them you saw me here on my way to paradise, carried by 16 demons." Robert reached Jerusalem and set out on his return, and soon after rumours came back to Paris that he had died on his way home. The accounts of the manner of his death were contradictory and uncertain, but the fact was soon made sure, and the news produced everywhere a great sensation. It soon appeared that the brothers and cousins of Robert, who had claimed the right to succeed him in preference to his son William, had only suspended their claims; they had not abandoned them. They began to gather their forces, each in his own separate domain, and to prepare to take the field, if necessary, in vindication of what they considered their rights to the inheritance. In a word, their oaths of fealty to William were all forgotten, and each claimant was intent only on getting possession himself of the ducal crown. In the meantime, William himself was at Paris, and only 11 years of age. He had been receiving a careful education there, and was a very prepossessing and accomplished young prince. Still he was yet but a mere boy. He had been under the care of a military tutor whose name was Thorold. Thorold was a veteran soldier who had long been in the employ of the King of France. He took great interest in his young pupil's progress. He taught him to ride and to practice all the evolutions of horsemanship which were required by the tactics of those days. He trained him, too, in the use of arms. The bow and arrow, the javelin, the sword, the spear, and accustomed him to wear and to exercise in the armour of steel with which warriors were used in those days to load themselves in going into battle. Young princes like William had suits of this armour made for them of small size, which they were accustomed to wear in private in their military exercises and trainings, and to appear in publicly on great occasions of state. These dresses of iron were of course very heavy and uncomfortable, but the young princes and dukes were, nevertheless, very proud and happy to wear them. While William was thus engaged in pursuing his military education in Paris, several competitors for his dukedom immediately appeared in Normandy and took the field. The strongest and most prominent among them was the Earl of Arques. His name was William too, but to distinguish him from the young duke, we shall call him Arques. He was a brother of Robert, and maintained that as Robert left no lawful heir, he was indisputably entitled to succeed him. Arques assembled his forces and prepared to take possession of the country. It will be recollected that Robert, when he left Normandy in setting out on his pilgrimage, had appointed a nobleman named Alan to act as regent or governor of the country until he should return, or in case he should never return, until William should become of age. Alan had a council of officers, called the Council of Regency, with whose aid he managed the administration of the government. This council, with Alan at their head, proclaimed young William duke, and immediately began to act in his name. When they found that the Earl of Arques was preparing to seize the government, they began to assemble their forces also, and thus both sides prepared for war. Before they actually commenced hostilities, however, the pilgrim knights who had accompanied Robert on his pilgrimage, and who had been journeying home slowly by themselves ever since their leader's death, arrived in Normandy. These were chieftains and nobles of high rank and influence, and each of the contending parties were eager to have them join their side. Besides the actual addition of force which these men could bring to the cause they should espouse, the moral support they would give to it was a very important consideration. Their having been on this long and dangerous pilgrimage invested them with a sort of romantic and religious interest in the minds of all people who looked up to them, in consequence of it, with a sort of veneration and awe. And then, as they had been selected by Robert to accompany him on his pilgrimage, and had gone on the long and dangerous journey with him, continuing to attend upon him until he died, they were naturally regarded as his most faithful and confidential friends. For these and similar reasons, it was obvious that the cause which they should espouse in the approaching contest would gain a large accession of moral power by their adhesion. As soon as they arrived in Normandy, rejecting all proposals from other quarters, they joined young William's cause with the utmost promptitude and decision. Alan received them at once into his councils. An assembly was convened, and the question was discussed whether William should be sent for to come to Normandy. Some argued that he was yet a mere boy, incapable of rendering them any real service in the impending contest, while he would be exposed, more perhaps than they themselves, to be taken captive or slain. They thought it best, therefore, that he should remain for the present in Paris under the protection of the French king. Others, on the other hand, contended that the influence of William's presence, boy as he was, would animate and inspire all his followers, and awaken everywhere throughout the country a warm interest in his cause; that his very tenderness and helplessness would appeal strongly to every generous heart; and that his youthful accomplishments and personal charms would enlist thousands in his favour, who would forget and perhaps abandon him if he kept away. Besides, it was by no means certain that he was so safe as some might suppose, in King Henry's custody and power. King Henry might himself lay claims to the vacant duchy.